On this Friday night, a litany of charges in the Rideau Hall security breach.
He had several weapons.
New details on the accused intruder and how long it took for police to arrest him. The controversial contract between the feds and the We charity canceled. The ethics commissioner's pending investigation. Atlantic Canadians now free to roam 4 provinces. Who wants to burst this travel bubble? And when COVID crashes the greatest outdoor show on earth.
We wanted to celebrate it in some way.
How to party Calgary Stampede style during the pandemic.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, David Aiken.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We are learning more tonight about the security breach near the Prime Minister's residence and the alleged suspect involved. A Manitoba man who is a member of the military is facing several weapons-related charges. He was arrested yesterday morning. Police say he managed to get less than 200 meters from the Prime Minister's front door. Abigail Bimman has our top story tonight.
A new barrier at the gate of Rideau Hall the morning after this Dodge Ram rammed it open.
Immediate measures have been put in place to increase security following yesterday's events.
But the RCMP aren't saying much about those events or the motivation of the suspect, identified as 46-year-old Corey Huron. Police did release more information on the 2-hour timeline, alleging Huron drove into the gate at 6:29 a.m., left the truck here, and hid near the bushes all the way over here. An officer spoke to him by the greenhouse at 6:45, but it took 8 minutes before he responded and another hour and a half before he was arrested.
He had several weapons.
Huron now faces 22 charges, most relating to weapons, with 1 count of uttering threats.
Grew that business to something incredible. Certainly his clients throughout Manitoba that know him and he sells his products to. This is not the kind of guy that shows up in Ottawa with a gun.
Bill Gade runs the local radio station in Swan River. He launched this GoFundMe page to raise money for the Huron family. He says the tight-knit community has been hit hard by the news, with many different opinions on what happened and a lot of shock. Huron is a Canadian Ranger. He built a meat company, which in a May Facebook post he says COVID-19 forced him to put on hold. The manager of the Swan Valley Co-op said Huron also worked there for 11 years until he quit in 2019, and they'll cooperate with any authorities in an investigation.
That's not Corey. That's not the way he's ever acted. He's always done good for the community. He's a member of the Lions Club. He's done amazing things for them.
Friday's court appearance was very brief. Huron will remain in custody until his next court date, July 17th. David?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Thank you, Abigail. In Winnipeg, a 14-year-old boy has been charged with first-degree murder. That happened after a string of shootings that left 1 person dead and several others injured. Police say the crimes appear to be random. The teen cannot be named under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. He's accused of a series of shootings and assaults over a 24-hour period that started early Wednesday morning. One of the victims, a 27-year-old woman, died. Police say none of the victims were known to the suspect.
We don't believe any of these victims knew their shooter, and that's about as far as we can get in terms of motive at this time. And I think that's an important component to this investigation. I think it's going to be terrifying and concerning for a lot of Winnipeg. The fact that we would have so much violence and committed by such a young individual.
The 14-year-old remains in custody, facing multiple charges. Police say he had no prior criminal record. Parliament's Ethics Commissioner wants to know more about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's ties to the We charity. We had been tapped by the Trudeau government to distribute $900 million in honorariums to tens of thousands of students for volunteer work. Today, though, the Prime Minister said the deal with We had been scrapped. Robin Gill is hosting the West Block this weekend and joins us now. So, Robin, what is behind this We controversy?
David, from the beginning, the Prime Minister insisted that this wasn't a conflict of interest giving We this contract, even though his wife is an ambassador to the organization.
Girls, we run this mother.
Sophie Gregoire Trudeau is often front and center at WE events. Here she is in London just in March before she tested positive for COVID-19. The charity, founded by Canadian brothers Mark and Craig Kielburger, was supposed to manage the federal government's $900 million program to pay students and new graduates who volunteered this summer. Each volunteer could get up to $5,000 for schooling costs if they work the maximum 500 hours. In a statement, all Youth Minister Bardish Chugger would say is that it was a mutually agreed upon decision. But the Prime Minister says it was the charity that decided to back out.
Obviously, we're going to continue to work to ensure that young people have opportunities to serve right across the country. This is something that will change a bit with WE's decision, which we support. We will continue to work very hard, and we need to reflect carefully on what exactly went wrong and how we can make sure that we're doing a better job of supporting young people in the coming months and years.
From the outset, the Prime Minister said the public service made the decision to give WE the contract. Now that very same public service will have to run the program. The opposition parties have demanded to know how much the charity stood to gain from administering the program. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh tweeted, "This doesn't clear up why and how the decision was made in the first place. The Prime Minister still needs to answer for this scandal." The opposition parties are not letting up. The Conservatives have even gone as far to the Auditor General to launch an investigation. As for WE, the charity organization, it'll now have to pay back the federal government all the money it's been given so far, David.
Robin Gill in Vancouver tonight. Thank you very much, Robin. An Alberta First Nation east of Calgary is working overtime to deal with an outbreak of COVID-19, imposing new restrictions to contain the cluster. The Siksika First Nation has recorded 10 cases of COVID-19, and there's now concern there could be more. The First Nations chief says the risk of community transmission is high. In Atlantic Canada, COVID-19 infection rates remain relatively low and stable. There are just 5 active cases in the entire region. Their success is paying off in a big way today. All 4 Atlantic provinces are opening up their borders to each other. As Eric Sorensen explains, it's a turning point in the pandemic.
Finally, the Confederation Bridge is connecting Prince Edward Islanders to New Brunswickers once more. This couple from PEI on their way to see grandchildren in Fredericton.
Great. Feels great. You've a little freedom.
Not far away, a simple drive from Nova Scotia to New Brunswick became a breakthrough achievement. The huge numbers traveling and the patience required, a reminder of how COVID-19 has smothered life as we know it for the last 4 months.
So how long have you been waiting now?
About 30 minutes. There are checkpoints entering all 4 provinces, slowing things down, but not dampening spirits.
Oh, it feels pretty good. We just had some paperwork completed and that we did, which was really quite easy and quite efficient.
Until now, the 4 Atlantic provinces have been in their own bubbles, and it has worked by and large. The numbers in Atlantic Canada, fewer than 1,600 total cases over the last 4 months. That represents 1.4% of the national total of more than 100,000 cases. As for new cases, in Nova Scotia, there were 2 on July the 2nd. In the other 3 Atlantic provinces, there were none. But as you go from individual bubbles to one big bubble, does that risk increasing the spread of COVID-19? The more people cross paths with one another, the greater the chance the virus will develop. In Newfoundland and Labrador, some are worried. About 15,000 signed an online petition that says the province is slowly going back to normal, and it reads, "We want to keep it that way. This is not the time to open the borders."
You know, when you move from lockdown and you start to open up, it is kind of anxiety-provoking.
This epidemiologist says it's a calculated but reasonable risk to reopen.
It's an ideal time to allow some movement so that people can enjoy the summer holidays and spend some time exploring the Atlantic provinces.
And it's an essential kickstart for tourism and the Atlantic economy, says one mayor.
The risk of illness from the virus directly has to be weighed against the stresses and the difficulties created by financial hardships and the social isolation.
It may look like gridlock, but it's a happy day. New Brunswickers going one way, Nova Scotians the other, and the hope that Atlantic Canada never has to lock down again. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Shifting now to a very different situation in the United States, With infection numbers surging, many states are reversing course on reopening plans as they struggle to get the virus under control. In some areas, so many people are needing tests that labs cannot keep up. As Jackson Prosco reports, there are fears that soon hospitals will also be totally overwhelmed.
Backed into a corner by the virus, America is locking back down. There's now a curfew in Miami, in place indefinitely until the pandemic is brought under control. Texas implemented a statewide mask order.
COVID-19 is not going away. In fact, it's getting worse.
Chicago announced a mandatory quarantine for anyone traveling from 15 hard-hit states.
We are not going to suffer the fate that we've seen of other states and localities across the country.
The surge in case numbers is unlike anything so far. In Arizona, nearly 1 in every 4 COVID-19 tests has come back positive. In Florida, which saw nearly 10,000 new cases again on Friday, it's 1 in every 5.
I'm incredibly worried about what's happening. We had hoped for a decline in cases in order to deal with what might be considered a second wave. We haven't even gotten out of this first wave, and it's getting worse.
Now there's a new problem. Testing sites like this one in Arizona are overwhelmed. Labs can't process the crush of samples.
It's absolutely the saddest thing, the most unnecessary situation that we're finding ourselves in, and it's behaviorally driven.
The timing of the surge up against the busy 4th of July holiday couldn't be worse, and federal leadership has been virtually absent. President Donald Trump hit the links for a round of golf Friday before jetting off to watch fireworks at Mount Rushmore in a crowd of thousands with no social distancing. The U.S. Surgeon General declined to say whether mass gatherings like that should be avoided.
It's not a yes or no. Every single person has to make up their own mind.
Increasingly, there's fear about what the coming weeks will look like, with hospitals already nearing capacity and with more death all but certain. The CDC admits 20,000 more Americans could die in the next 3 weeks, with the virus now so widespread it can't be contained. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Canada is suspending an extradition treaty with Hong Kong. That comes after China imposed a new controversial security law on the region. Ottawa is also taking other steps to change the way it deals with Hong Kong.
Canada will treat exports of sensitive goods to Hong Kong in the same way as those destined for mainland China. Effective immediately, Canada will not permit the export of sensitive military items to Hong Kong.
The new Chinese legislation criminalizes virtually all forms of dissent. It also sets up Chinese law enforcement in Hong Kong and allows anyone detained there to be extradited to the Chinese mainland. Roughly 300,000 Canadians live in Hong Kong. The former British colony's sovereignty was given back to China in 1997, but certain rights were supposed to be guaranteed under the One Country, Two Systems agreement. Meanwhile, a Hong Kong man has become the first person charged under the new security law. The 23-year-old was arrested on Wednesday after allegedly driving a motorcycle into police during a protest. He was carrying a sign saying, "Liberate Hong Kong." He was charged today with inciting separatism and terrorism. England is getting ready for Super Saturday. Coming up, the cheers and jeers as pubs prepare to reopen. Tragedy has struck southeast of Edmonton, where 3 people have died in a plane crash. The aircraft plummeted into a field this morning. According to fire crews, witnesses believe they heard the small plane's engine stall moments before it crashed. An official from the Cooking Lake Airport tells Global News that one of the victims was a flying instructor. The United Kingdom is still one of the hot spots of COVID-19 in Europe, but overall infection rates are dropping. And starting tomorrow, England's world-renowned pubs will reopen as restrictions ease. And today, Prince William got in early, skipping the queue to sip on his first pub pint and to check how owners are preparing for the influx of people. As Redmond Shannon reports, while many are in desperate need of a drink, others are a little nervous.
The UK's first pub pints in more than 100 days were poured in Northern Ireland on Friday.
Everyone's abiding by the rules and, they just want to see their mates and have a pint.
Because of this 2 metre thing, we can't sit together, but at least we're in the same place.
COVID-19 appears to be under control in much of the UK. But the English city of Leicester was forced back into a hard lockdown this week after a spike in new infections. It comes as the rest of England emerges from lockdown this Saturday, with pubs, restaurants and hair salons reopening.
We're not out of the woods yet.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is pleading with the public to behave.
The economic health of the whole country is dependent on every single one of us acting responsibly.
Given the chaotic scenes at this English beach just last week, many people are worried about bars reopening.
Slightly worried about going into a pub or on public transport at the moment.
For me, I'm quite frightened, still. For some of the younger people, it may be fine, but if it starts to spread, we've got a real problem.
Britain's pubs are also not quite the community hubs they once were. A quarter of them have closed down within the past 20 years.
The lockdown and this sanitised new reality will only further impact an industry and a tradition that was already struggling.
And hopefully the measures we put in place aren't too strict and restrictive, so customers don't feel as though they can relax and enjoy themselves.
The future of the UK's proud pub culture could hinge on these next few months, and the spread of the virus will depend on how people behave.
Well, sure.
Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Weeks after ending one of the world's strictest lockdowns, South Africa is seeing a surge in new COVID-19 cases. More than 8,700 new cases were reported on Thursday. That is the country's biggest single-day jump since the start of the pandemic. Hospitals are now bracing for a surge in patients. Officials warn they may have to reimpose restrictions to get infections under control. Still ahead, why are hundreds of elephants in Botswana suddenly dying?
You're watching Global National.
At least 22 people are dead after a train hit a bus in eastern Pakistan. Officials say the bus driver was trying to cross the railway tracks but got stuck as the train approached. The bus was reportedly filled with Sikh pilgrims who were returning from a visit to a shrine. Many of those killed are believed to be from the same family. A trial into the grisly murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi got underway in Turkey today. The defendants, 20 Saudi nationals, have all left Turkey and are being tried in absentia. Khashoggi's fiancée told the court today that he was lured to his death through a great betrayal and deception. Khashoggi was an outspoken critic of the Saudi regime. He was tortured, killed, and dismembered inside Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul in October 2018. The defendants include 2 former aides to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who denies involvement. Saudi Arabia convicted 8 people over the murder last year, but they have never been identified. Botswana is investigating the mysterious deaths of hundreds of elephants. A warning, some of the video here may be upsetting. The country has confirmed 275 have died, but a rescue organization says the number could be over 400. The dead elephants were first spotted months ago in the popular Okavango Delta area. Common killers like poaching and anthrax have been ruled out. Samples are being collected to figure out what is causing these sudden deaths.
If this was a disease or virus or a bacterial outbreak that was to spread, as I mentioned earlier, if those smaller, less genetically diverse populations were affected, then it could have devastating consequences for the elephant population and therefore the economy and the environment of the host countries as well.
A conservation group calls this, quote, one of the biggest disasters to impact elephants this century. Africa's overall elephant population is declining due to poaching, but Botswana, home to almost a third of the continent's elephants, has seen a growth in the numbers since the late 90s. Up next, Stampede in spirit, how a Calgary tradition is still saddling up. For the first time in a century, the Calgary Stampede has been sidelined. Today was supposed to be parade day, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, much of the greatest show on earth has been canceled. Now, as Heather Urix West reports, many in that city are finding other ways to celebrate.
He was supposed to be parade marshal. Instead, Brazil-born Felipe Masete-Lete completed an 8-year journey crossing the Americas on horseback with a quiet convoy across Calgary. Still, arriving at the Stampede grounds marked the realization of a lifelong dream.
I'm so happy to have gotten here with these beautiful horses.
Because of the pandemic, there will be no parade, midway, or rodeo, but across Calgary, the Stampede spirit is strong.
Wanted to celebrate it in some way, and the thought was that we can just bring Stampede to homes across Calgary with our team of photographers.
The team already capturing dozens of Western-themed family snapshots. They plan to keep it going all summer long.
Smile.
For Carla Cruz and Curtis Berkovich, it was the perfect way to kick off a Stampede that will be spent, for the most part, at home.
I can't think of a year where I hadn't done something. Yeah. So it's unusual that it's not going on.
There will be some official Stampede events on offer. There will be fireworks and food.
Just a little bit of a taste of Stampede, hopefully being offered through the pancake drive-thrus, the mini donut drive-thrus, and the food truck rally.
While many Stampede corporate parties have had to be canceled, many companies are still asking their employees to show their Western pride by dressing up while working from home.
From social media pancake parties to learning line dances online, many community celebrations have gone virtual too.
So we thought, let's offer something online that people could join in and still feel that sense of community and connection.
Oh, I'm holding it and he's gonna drink it?
For the die-hard, it's a far cry from the real thing. But in a year where nothing is normal, there is one thing that's certain. Stampede 2020 will be one that no one forgets. Heather Urix West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm David Aiken. Tonight's Your Canada is this iceberg in Port Rexton, Newfoundland and Labrador. We love seeing Your Canada, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching. Robin Gill will be here tomorrow. Good night from the nation's capital.